What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Around the Paw. The bye week is over, and the Clemson Tigers are returning home to Death Valley for a 12 noon kickoff against the North Carolina State Wolfpack. We're going to break down the game on this week's episode. We're going to talk about whether or not the Tigers can parlay the historic offensive effort from 2 weeks ago into this week's matchup against a packed team that has defeated the Tigers 2 out of the last 3 years. We've got a lot to talk about here on Around the Paw. We are pleased also to be joined by Just Grice from a Pack of Wolves podcast, and we look forward to his insight on the North Carolina State side of things, and we've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about. As always, I'm Garrett Mitchell, along with Griffin Barfield and Clifton Kennedy as well, and again, a welcome to Justin for joining us again on our podcast this season. So sit back, relax, turn up the volume. It's time for Around the Paw. All right, guys, so we've got a big game coming up this week. And Justin, as always, we always go to the guest first. Let's talk about the elephant in the room for the Wolfpack. And I'm not talking about Alabama. That's the quarterback situation for the Wolfpack. Grayson McCall has been ruled out for this ball game. Where does NC State turn at quarterback this week, and how does that affect the game for you guys?
Sure, man. Just wanted to say, first off, thanks for having us on, man. It's always a great time talking with y'all. It's always a good time. But this week, this is probably one of my favorite weeks of the football season. Half wasn't really the best, thing that we could have done. Grayson went out. Yeah, the early prognosis is that he's got another concussion. So, it might be a situation where he might be done for good. But ultimately CJ came in the second half and he didn't get off to the greatest start, threw a pick in his first drive, and that wasn't the way that we expected. But he rallied in the second half and threw for 150 yards and rushed for a touchdown. And we didn't punt in the second half. So it was, it was a good thing, good time for us to see. So to get some offensive continuity. So he's going to be the quarterback going forward, and he's going to be our guy for the next foreseeable future. And hopefully he'll be in there for years to come. So
right. And Griffin, we typically talk about the Clemson offense first, but we're going to circle back around to Justin on this point. But with a freshman quarterback starting for NC State coming into an environment like Death Valley, do you see that factoring into the game at all? And does that give this Clemson defense, which is very, very good, does that give them a bit of an edge coming into this one?
I definitely think
I would have to agree.
Yeah. I would.
I would.
Sure.
I would have to agree. Especially with Bailey, I do like his frame. 6'6". He seemed to have the command for a majority of that game. He did throw that early interception, but I think that's just a beginner's mistake. I think you see a lot more with the running game. I really think that NC State found a lot of success with their two-back duo of Kendrick Raphael and Jordan Waters. He's a familiar face. He was a Duke running back last year who had a really big game. He did score a touchdown as well. So I really think that NC State may start off this game maybe running a little bit more, finding obviously Casey Conception the ball. He's one of the top receivers in the ACC. So for me, I think that you just have to get those stops early. Third down, you got to make it loud, maybe force a turnover and put this game on its head early.
Yeah, and what do you think, Cliff? How do you see this working out for the Wolfpack? Unmute yourself, buddy. Microphones are your friend. There he goes.
There we go. I see the Wolfpack coming in here and putting up a fight. I mean, they got Casey Concepcion. They got a little issue at quarterback right now, but watching him play in that second half, I mean, he didn't miss a beat. So we'll see. Coming into Death Valley in that type of environment, I think will play a factor. It's at high noon, so hopefully the crowd gets in there and goes crazy.
Yeah, Justin, from the NC State side of things, what's the feel and what's the perception going into this ball game, having a freshman quarterback going up against really one of the best defensive lines in college football?
Yeah, if you had asked me that in the first half of the Louisiana Tech game, you would have gotten one answer from our fan base, and then you watched the second half and you would have got a different answer. So we're hopeful is really the best word that I can use for us going forward. I mean, CJ does have a lot of good presence in the huddle, and I think a lot of the guys responded to him in the second half. So, I mean, I think that's the best word that I can really sum up for our fan base right now with CJ. I mean, the hope is he takes this game and at least shows us that he can be the guy going forward, win or lose. I think he can at least demonstrate to us that he has enough command of the offense to really take the reins going forward.
Right. And Griffin and Cliff, you both mentioned Casey Concepcion, really, really talented receiver. And this guy's good enough to give any team in the country problems. So in terms of the way I look at it, I think the best way to defend Concepcion might be to try to bring pressure on the young quarterback, disrupt his timing, disrupt his rhythm, and in that sense, be able to try to keep the ball out of Concepcion's hands.
No, I agree. I think that it's a big day for either Shelton Lewis or Avion Terrell, whoever is going to be guarding Concepcion. I think it may be Shelton Lewis more than Terrell, but I could be completely wrong. But across the field for NC State, you have weapons. Noah Rogers, he's a young player that I think that will break out at some point this season. Dakari Collins was another old Clemson player. He transferred 2 years ago, and he's got a really big frame. He's a very good deep threat, and you saw that with Clemson his freshman year. But I think that's the key to the game. I think you just got to force that pressure early. The third and longs are going to be huge. Stopping the run is big too. I know that Clemson gave up a lot of those missed tackles, those big plays, not only to Georgia, especially in that second half of the game, but Appalachian State too. Their running back found a little bit more success getting those first downs, moving the chains, especially in that latter half of the first half and even into the second half as well. I think you just got to stop the run early, keep him very, very distracted, and I think the crowd will play a huge factor in that.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I think I just read an article this morning talking about how that's what Dabo's keyed on, to stop the run, because that's what they've been known for a while. And but you can't just key on the run. I mean, if you totally key on the run, then they're going to beat you over the top with, again, Concepcion. So I totally agree. We have to stop the run first and make them one-dimensional.
Right. And Justin, from an offensive standpoint for the Wolfpack, how do they attack this Clemson defense? And as Griffin talked about, do you try to establish the run first and then set up the passing game off of that? What's the game plan here?
So I think realistically, I mean, I really expect Clemson's defensive line to be probably one of the best defensive lines that we've played all year. I mean, we kind of came out of the Tennessee game, seeing how that speed does affect us. But CJ, I think, is going to be in a situation where they're going to put him in some zone reads. And I think we saw a little bit of that last week. And I think they're going to make him a little bit more mobile to try to get outside of that defensive pressure up front, just to maybe even get him comfortable as well. The best thing that I think I can see them is also doing is using the short passing game as an extension of the running game a little bit for us this week too. So I would expect to really see some wide receiver screens early, at least, and some little 5-yard out routes to maybe get him comfortable, get him into the flow of the game. And I definitely think that's going to be a huge key for us, is to make sure that we can execute in those situations where we need to have a 3rd and 3 or a 3rd and 4 where we can keep the chains moving against Clemson's defense, because we all know they're one of the best in the country. So, the best way that we can probably win this game is to keep Clemson's offense off the field and wear out that Clemson defense as the game goes on.
Right. And Justin, I think you brought up a good point. And Griffin, I'll kick this one to you. Talking about getting established in the passing game by just doing the short and intermediate routes to try to get some feeling, some comfortability there. That's something that Clemson has seen before. And I'll go back to the Miami game last year when Miami was down to a second and third string quarterback, and that's exactly what we saw. Miami just started to throw those short 5 to 7 yard out patterns, 10 yards, 12 yards at most, and that simply got the quarterback into a rhythm, and it opened up everything else offensively. So I think if the Tigers are smart, if Wes Goodwin is smart, he could go back and look at that game film, learn from that past history and kind of see how that might factor into his defensive scheme this week.
Yeah, I thought Miami was an interesting game to bring up, given the backup quarterback situation. I think that's where NC State will probably take this game. I don't see any deep shots early, maybe on those 3rd and longs, 4th and longs, but quarterback's friend is those 3rd and shorts, and that's how Georgia kind of got to move down that field as well. I know I'm comparing Carson Beck to a player that is making his first start, but you can just tell that the quarterbacks are a lot more comfortable with those shorter yard situations because they have more to do. They could throw out the short pass. They could run a draw play. They could run it. They could take it themselves. And CJ Bailey was the guy that, he ran in for a touchdown himself. Big frame, tough to take down. So I wouldn't be surprised if NC State pulled that out as well. I think that could be a very useful option to move down the field and move those chains.
Attention all Clemson fans. Get ready for a game day like never before. Looking for the best game day parking in Clemson? Golden Gate Parking has got you covered. With over 100 spacious spots for cars, trucks, and RVs, you can tailgate like a champion without worrying about missing kickoff. And to make things even easier, our shuttle service will take you right to the game for just an extra $10 per person. Don't wait until the last minute to reserve your spot. Book now. But Justin, I think comfortability here for the quarterback, that's a big key for NC State in this ball game. You need to be able to be comfortable or have a little bit of a feel for the game, because if you let the game get sped up for you too much, especially with a Clemson defensive line with guys like Peter Woods, TJ Parker, DeMonte K. Park, Trey Williams, that's something that I think can get away from a young quarterback in a big hurry if they don't let the game slow down for them.
I totally agree. I mean, we saw what Peter Woods did to this offensive line last year. I mean, most of our starters are the same. We brought back 4 starters on the offensive line and then brought in Zeke Correll in the transfer portal. So, ultimately we were expecting our offensive line to be a little bit more, physical up front. But I really would expect Clemson to really kind of get into the gaps and really force NC State to make CJ make those deep throws and those medium to deep throws for us. So, I mean, he's shown that he's capable of doing that, but it's really going to be on our offensive line to give him enough time to really have him make those throws.
Right. And guys, I do want to talk about this aspect of the ball game on Saturday. And that's the mental aspect of it. And we're going to get into the Clemson offense against the North Carolina State defense here in just a few minutes. But the fact remains that the Wolfpack have beaten Clemson 2 out of the last 3 meetings. So this is a situation where coming into this ball game, I don't think North Carolina State's going to be at all intimidating. This is a Clemson team that they've beaten. You've got plenty of guys on this team that have experienced beating Clemson. They're believers in themselves coming in this ball game. That's a factor I think the Tigers have to fight against a little bit.
I think it starts with the coach too, Dave Dorian. I think that he is one of the most underrated coaches in the ACC. He's one of the longest tenured coaches in the ACC too. And going back to not being phased, College Game Day was here 2 years ago, and it was only a 10-point loss in NC State's favor. They put up a really good fight. So for me, I think that they're going to go into this game like any other game. They are a cultured team. They're going to win by their mentality. I think that they're a very great mentality team. That's how they beat Clemson last year. That's how they beat Clemson 3 years ago at Carter Finley. So I really think that Clemson is just going to have to show their talent. I think he starts with their stars on offense, and I think you just have to make the plays on defense that matter. But NC State, you can't really sleep on them. They know how to win games, especially if the games get hairy.
Yeah, I mean, with Clemson losing 2 out of 3 and the last, 3 years, I do think it's going to be a little mental game in the beginning that they have to fight. But I think, Clemson just needs to depend on their talent and the game plan and stay steady, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we talked about. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just asking you, Justin. Kind of what the three of us talked about from the mental side of things. Just how confident is NC State coming into this ball game, knowing that they've had that success against Clemson 2 of the past 3 seasons?
So I think the team's definitely going to be confident. I mean, I think Dave is always going to have his teams ready to play when it comes to this game in particular. And we talked about this on our podcast, and it's one of those situations where you got two of the longest tenured head coaches in the ACC. They've played each other for the last 12 years. They both know each other very well. Both teams, there's not really going to be a ton of secrets. There's not going to be a ton of things that either team can really throw at each other. So, I mean, mentally, I think it's going to be a situation where they're going to be mentally ready, and it's just going to be a matter of, which team is the team that makes the mistake, which team is the team that makes that crucial turnover that leads to a shift in momentum.
Right. And speaking of turnovers, I think that's a good way to segue kind of into this Clemson offense against the North Carolina State defense. Now, the Tigers are coming off of a bye week. Before that, it was a historic offensive output, 66 points against an Appalachian State team that really, by all accounts, is not a bad football team. Certainly, it was not on 66 points was not on my bingo card, much less 35 in the first quarter, 56 in the first half. So, Griffin, when you look at that offensive output, you parlay it into this week. Should Clemson fans think that Cade Klubnik and the offense have turned the corner, or is it one of these things where let's be cautiously optimistic and see what they do as the competition ramps up?
I mean, you saw in the press conferences too, you have to be a little bit passive on what happened against App State because they played nearly flawlessly. Cade Klubnik played the best half for a Clemson quarterback in program history. So it is very tough to replicate that sort of scenario. And here against NC State team, that's very good. They're returning two of their cornerbacks that did not play against LA Tech. Aiden White, he was an all-ACC corner. So that's another way to kind of navigate through that. But I think that you do have found success. You have your guys in Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore. I don't know if Tyler Brown is playing. He is day-to-day. Dabo just said that in his teleconference about a few hours ago. But I think that you have to find the ball through Maffa. I think that's huge. He hasn't gotten the ball as much as I wanted him to. But I think that Cade's confidence in the pocket is going to be one of the biggest factors of this game. And I think that he's going to show it again and again. You saw it a little bit against Georgia where, that defense was just constantly berating him, but he remained in the pocket and he made some great plays. He did that all the time against App State. I think you'll see a little bit more of that against NC State. I think you do see one or two deep passes of 25 or 30 yards being connected.
Yep, I agree with that. I would like to see Maffa get the ball more. Like you were saying, I still think, as well as that passing game worked last week, I still think you need to feed Maffa and spurt in the passing game. I still think that, the run game feeds the passing game. I'm going to say that because I just think Maffa is one of the best backs in the ACC, and if not the best. And so keep feeding him, until they stop it. And, we have the wide receivers because we saw how they played last week. And so that's kind of how I see this. That's how I would like this offense to go. But, it went to me, it worked totally opposite last week or 2 weeks ago. They started off passing and it worked. So I don't know.
Right. So when you look, Justin, when you look at this Clemson offense, and really it's a small sample size to go on, I think some of us, when we watched the Georgia game, we saw so much of the same that we've seen for the last 2 to 3 years. And it's going through our heads, it's here we go again. But then you get to Appalachian State, and granted, they are not on the same plane as the Georgia Bulldogs, but compared to what Clemson fans have seen the last 3 years, to see that kind of downfield passing attack, to see that kind of offensive explosion, that was something that just has not been a part of this offense. You saw the game last year. Clemson had absolutely no threat whatsoever of a vertical passing game. Now you've got these two freshman wide receivers in Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore, who, frankly, we clamored for them to play against Georgia. They rarely saw the field. But against Appalachian State, we got a bit of a glimpse of what they could do. So as you look at those two guys, is that any cause for concern for this NC State defense, knowing that now Clemson maybe has a couple of guys they can use to take the top off in the passing game?
You couldn't say any better. I mean, of course, we're going to have some concerns about Wesco. I mean, I watched the Georgia game and I watched the Appalachian State game with you guys, and, he looked like a completely different player in two different games. I mean, he didn't really get a lot of run in Georgia, but, Wesco is the guy that we've seen from Clemson, Clemson of old. So, of course, we're going to have some concerns on that. I think this is going to be a situation, too, though, where our defense is essentially designed to keep big plays off the board. So the way that we run the 3-3-5, so we're going to have 5 defensive backs or more on the field at all times. So we're going to be making sure that Wesco is going to be the one that's not going to beat us. I will say that. But going back to what you said earlier, I mean, Maffa, to me, if I was a Clemson fan, has to be the one that gets fed in this game, especially against a 3-man front. I mean, we all know that it's a lot easier to run the football against a 3-man front than it is, a 4-man front. So, we saw it in the second half of the Clemson game last year, when they started feeding Phil Maffa in the second half. That's when really we saw the game turning in Clemson's favor. I mean, he was able to get almost 6 yards a carry against us last year. So I really think, and I've joked with a couple of our Clemson fans offline, is, you guys threw almost 50 times, I think, last year in that game, but Phil Maffa was the one that had more yards per play than Cade did. So if I'm a Clemson fan, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to feed the running game, against this defense and see if we can't wear them out in the fourth quarter.
Right. And guys, like you said, Justin, it's a 3-man front. And that kind of harkens back to this Clemson offensive line. The hire of Matt Luke, I thought it really began there. We heard all off season about how improved that unit was going to be. And frankly, that is manifested through the first 2 games. Even against Georgia, they rarely got to Klubnik. As you said, Griffin, he was able to stand in the pocket even in the face of that pass rush. The line was able to keep him clean long enough to at least get some throws off. Dabo Swinney even called center Ryan Linthicum, the team's MVP through the first 2 games of the year. Mm-hmm. So if NC State's playing this 3-man front, obviously it's a bit easier to find room. Then the offensive line, I think, with their improvements, has a chance to really open the holes for Maffa in the Clemson running game.
I completely agree. This is a guy that I've said timelessly, and I know App State is a little bit of a wild card because most of the starters only played one half, but Phil Maffa needs to get the ball more. He only had 16 carries against Georgia. He had, I believe, 10 against App State. He had 10 for 118, including that 82-yard rushing touchdown. I've said this almost every single time on this podcast. You put the ball in his hands. He was the reason they won that 5-game winning streak. I mean, and a coach told Cade Klubnik in the or at least he told us in the press conference that Cade does not have to win any games. He just has to manage them, and that means starting the ball with Maffa. He has not, at least for me, let me down. Besides that Duke fumble, that's it. That was week 1 last year. Since then, he has fully grown. I think that he needs between 20 and 25 carries a night. I really think that he does. He's very much lightning in a bottle. As soon as he gets downhill, he's able to. He goes very fast. I forget the miles per hour he ran on that 82-yard touchdown, but it was over 20. It was like 20.8 or 20.9. It was very, very impressive.
Yeah, it was like 20 or 21. I can't remember. It was in between that.
Long story short, he needs to get the ball, especially against a 3-man front like NC State. And I'm looking at I watched the Tennessee game, and Sampson, the running back, he had a big game too. And I think that you just have to continue to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's where what we agree on is Maffa needs to get the ball, and we need to until they can't stop it. I mean, and then throw it over the top, because once they think Maffa's gonna get it, then you just toss it over the top to Wesco or the other 9 receivers we have on. So that's kind of how I would like for this ball game to go. So
I would totally agree with you. I mean, he really was a physical back, and it's a situation for us, on our end. Sean Brown's come down and he's done a great job. He's leading the team in tackles right now, but he's still kind of almost a safety in the linebacker's body. And that's one of the things that they tasked him to do in this offseason was to put on weight. And I think that's one of the things that, even if he did put on some, he did put on about 20 pounds, but he's still, an undersized linebacker. So, Maffa still has that physicality, and the tough to bring down is really what I'm the most concerned about as an NC State fan. I mean, I'm concerned that he's going to have a pretty big day against us.
Take it.
I mean, I'm not sure where. Yeah. I'm not sure where Garrett went. I mean, just speaking about Phil Maffa a little bit more. Where do you think NC State can be able to stifle not only Maffa, but I mean Klubnik too, this Clemson offense as a whole, because they were able to do it on the passing front. I mean, the Peyton Wilson pick six last year kind of changed the whole game for them. For you, Justin, where does NC State need to defeat Clemson on the side of the ball, whether it be passing or rushing?
So, like we were talking a little bit about earlier, I mean, even though we do have a three-man front, the defense is designed to still, let the linebackers flow to make the tackles. And, I can't say enough about Davin Ban. I mean, he's a senior. And so, those jobs up front are a tough job. When you got a three-man front, your job is to occupy multiple blocks. And so, that's what they're tasked with. And so I really think Sean Brown is still going to be kind of that Peyton Wilson type of linebacker. Like, we're asking him to essentially do the same things, even though we know he's not Peyton. He's still going to be the guy that brings on the edge blitzes and covers the running backs out of the backfield and covers those slot receivers. So I really do think that he can be a difference maker, because Burningstill really hurt us a lot last year too. And so I really think Sean can really be a difference maker for us, just because I think he has those safety skills and he has those coverage skills for our defense. But, we're still worried about all the different weapons that Clemson brings to us. But I think overall for us, I mean, our defense is essentially designed like just an umbrella. Keep all the big plays, in front of you, keep everything in front of you. And the only way that teams have really gotten big plays against us is if, we bust a coverage or we miss a tackle. So, I think it could be a situation where that might be the difference in the game too. If we miss a tackle or we bust a coverage and Clemson gets a big play too.
Have to fill me in on what you were talking about. Sorry, I went the route of Tony Soprano and just faded to black there for a few minutes. I don't know what happened, but the good news is I think it's rectified now. So, and I think so. I think that would probably behoove them in terms of a game plan. It's a solid NC State team all the way around, and certainly it's a rivalry game. But coming in, I think Clemson, I think Coach Swinney, he knows the challenge that he's up against, even with a freshman quarterback for NC State. You've got to be aware of their capabilities, and they certainly have some guys, and like we've talked about from the top of the show, they're a dangerous team. NC State's got some guys who can really hurt you.
No, I mean, I agree. And I know Justin can take this away. I know we brought up Casey Conception again and again and again. He was a huge freshman impact last year. Again, Dakari Collins, Clemson guy. There may be not some bad blood, but just an ability to play your former team in your former stadium. Maybe that ups the ante for him. And then Noah Rogers was another guy that we brought up earlier, as well as the tandem running back of Raphael and Jordan Waters. And even Bailey can use his feet to extend plays.
Yeah. The running back, which running back was it that came from Duke? I forget which one it was. Was it Waters?
Waters, yeah.
Yeah. And, he did really well at Duke last year. So seems like he's just starting off where he left off.
He's had some really good games. Really, Kendrick Raphael was the guy that really took over in the second half last week against Louisiana Tech. So it was really good to see Raphael. I mean, they're splitting carries right now. So Raphael is the leading rusher right now because he's getting, a lot more yards per carry. Is when I say leading rusher, he's better at yards per carry, even though Jordan's got more yardage. I mean, Jordan had 120 yards rushing in his first game, but he's only a little over 157 now. So that tells you just how good Tennessee and Louisiana Tech did of keeping him out of the game. But once he was kept out of the game, Raphael's the one who stepped up and really kind of carried the load for us. So, it's kind of, for us, it's kind of like we try to see who's the hot hand. We talked about that on our podcast. It's, who's hot, who's getting open, who's doing the things that they need to do to help us move the chains.
Right. So, I think when you boil it down and when you put all of the sum of all the parts together, I think we're looking at another great game between these two teams. And that always seems to be what happens, whether Clemson wins, whether NC State wins. You've got two teams that when they play each other, they're always going to lay it on the line. And I even go back to the Heartstopper in 2016. And Justin, that might be a bit more painful for you guys, but the missed field goals and the 33-yard field goal right there at the end of that game. I remember it vividly, and I think that game really encapsulates kind of what this rivalry has become between the Tigers and the Wolfpack. I don't think any of us are going to get out of these games without, a direct threat of having a heart attack. But, I think it comes with the territory. That's just the way it goes when the Tigers and Wolfpack get together.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say for sure. These two teams know each other well. They don't like each other. It was one of those things where Hunter was saying on our podcast, it was, we don't like y'all don't like us. It's brothers getting together, trying to, see who's better at this. But it's been great. I mean, the series is starting to get really interesting again because, when I was in school, it just really was really highly contested. I mean, we had Phillip Rivers, and both Clemson and NC State were really good football teams. And, we had Thursday night primetime games when I was there. And then, we had two different coaching staffs since then. And, in that middle time, it was just not good. I mean, it was a situation where we would go to Clemson expecting to get, beaten really bad. But, I think these last 5-6 years have really kind of spotlighted these two teams as teams that really, play really well against each other. I mean, they both like to do the same things. Their cultures are great. Dave knows Dabo and Dabo knows Dave. And I know the fans like to hate each other, but I think there's a lot of mutual respect between these two coaches.
Right. Well, look, the two fan bases for Clemson and NC State, we might not always get along. We might not always agree, but I think we can all come together and agree that Florida State sucks.
Yes.
There's our commonality. There's our common ground.
Absolutely.
Especially when we have guests on the show. We give our predictions for the game, how we think it's going to turn. So, there's some scores out here. Justin, your guest of honor, so you get the first shot on this one.
So I'm going to echo what we said on our podcast. I'm very consistent when it comes to a lot of this. I think, I used to choose this game a lot with my heart, and, my heart's always going to be with NC State. But I really think with what Clemson's going to be able to do in running the football, I really think that NC State's going to have a tough time again winning in Death Valley. It's been 22 years since we've won there. So I picked Clemson to win this game on our show, and I'm going to pick Clemson to win again on your show. I've got them winning 31-17. I still think it's close, but I do think NC State covers on this one.
All right, Griffin, what you got?
I'll go ahead. I think this game lower scoring than people think. I am going to say my same score that I said on Justin's podcast, Whole Pack of Wolves. Check it out; it's great. And on the Gridiron Guru too. I think this game's it's gonna stay close. It's one of those games where they know each other. It's gonna be a gutsy game. But for me, I really think that this Clemson defense steps up, especially in that second half. I think they force a turnover on a young quarterback, especially with a loud crowd. I do think NC State cover. I think that the line between Clemson and NC State's a little bit inflated. It went from like 11, and I think it's now like 20. or it went down to like 18, 19. It's
Mhm.
kind of stayed between that threshold. I have 24-13 Clemson. I think Clemson score a late touchdown and keep it out of range.
Yeah, I think they keep it close. They keep it, or they cover. I think NC State covers the points, and I'm gonna go 34-17. I don't see this being a 20-point, 21-point game. I could see it being 14-17. So I'm gonna go 34-17. Clemson.
Right. And really, my prediction mirrors exactly what you guys are saying. I do think it's a hard-fought game. I think NC State comes in with a lot of emotion. They're going to want to stand behind and back up their freshman quarterback. And like we've talked about the entire show, they are not devoid of talent. There's some really, really good players on the field for North Carolina State. I do think the three-man front, if NC State sticks with it, will open things up for Phil Maffa if they'll feed him the ball. I think Wesco and Moore, along with Antonio Williams, play a big role in the passing game. And kind of what you guys said, I think it's a late score that seals it, that kind of breaks open a close game a little bit. 2 years ago, this game was a 10-point game at Death Valley. Clemson won that one 30-20. I'm going to stick with the 10-point margin on this one, and I'm just going to go up 1 point on either side. Clemson 31, NC State 21.
I like it.
I like it. Just make sure y'all get me back on the show next week, when we're talking about the recap, and I'll make sure to bring my red Solo cup and cigar for y'all boys. That way we can talk a little bit of football next week.
Hey, let's do it. Let's do it, man. You're welcome anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. Y'all boys do a great show. We appreciate y'all having us on as always. So, I'm going to say with my heart, but head says Clemson, heart says NC State. So we'll see what happens on Saturday, guys.
Yeah, it's going to be a great game. Always look forward to it. I just hate it's not under the lights. I hate it's a noon game, but we'll have to wait one more week when Clemson plays Stanford under the lights, the homecoming game. But either way, Saturday should be a fun one. So, guys, a blast as always. Despite the technical difficulties, we'll endeavor to have that worked out next week. But when you live as far out in the boondocks as I do, none of the wireless internet services make their way out here, so you just have to make do with what you can. But we'll get by. But, guys, appreciate it. Fun talking Clemson and NC State football with you as always. And let's all look forward to Saturday now. So for the crew from around Clifton Kennedy and Justin Grice from a Pack of Wolves podcast, once again, we appreciate you coming on the show. So until next time, here's to a safe, fun game on Saturday, and go Tigers.
Go Pack.
Good Tigers.
Go Tigers.